Why do so many of us doubt our skills and talents when we're placed in positions of authority? And against whom are we measuring ourselves? Asking yourself whether you're up for the challenge is one thing, but second guessing yourself is another. One question assesses, the other doubts. Not everyone experiencing self doubt is unqualified, just like not everyone who appears confident is actually competent. So, where do you land? We'll get into it on the other side. Welcome to Crossroads and Catalysts. I'm your host, Shenita B. This is where we explore how a thoughtful, wise, and strategic perspective at life's crossroads can become the catalyst for meaningful change in your leadership and the direction of your life. If I had continued second guessing myself and believing the limiting thoughts that I was not skilled or competent enough, this podcast probably wouldn't exist. And I definitely would not be hosting the upcoming She Leads Her Money online workshop. So if you've been waiting to grow your financial confidence and awareness, I'd love for you to join me. Be sure to sign up so you don't miss it. The link is in the show notes. Now, my point with the questions in the opening is imposter syndrome and self doubt, they're robbing you of opportunities. And I don't think that you fully understand the impact of your capabilities and skills, which, let me tell you, they are not only meaningful, but they're valuable to your organization, to your team, and your personal circle of family and friends. And they're definitely valuable to you. So limiting yourself is robbing yourself of opportunities every time you give in to the notion you don't belong in the room, that you don't belong at the table, and that you're not capable of carrying out those duties. I want you to picture a highly capable professional walking into a room that they worked hard to get into, okay? They're educated, they're experienced, and they're prepared. Yet internally, they're convinced that they are one mistake away from being exposed. Does that sound like you? And the concern is not that you don't have the education nor the experience. It has nothing to do with being capable. It has nothing to do with being dishonest about your credentials, which got you there. The problem is the weight of the responsibility. Now you have more visibility, and now there's this expectation, and this has been distorted in your mind because this is how you're perceiving yourself. And at the same time, you're encountering people who lack the skill, but they never showed a lack of confidence, because I'm sure you can think of a handful of people right now who are in positions where it has been clearly demonstrated that they are not competent to carry out that job. Yet they have the title, they have the money that goes along with it, right? So I want to point this contrast out to you because it does make a difference. Because I think that too often confidence and competence, they don't always arrive together. And when you look at it, confidence is usually the first on the scene, and sometimes to the dismay of everybody else, because you can see when people do not exercise the skill and the competence to carry out the work. Okay? Many people are not underperforming because the role is too big for them. They're underperforming because doubt is interfering with their execution. And so I'm wondering, am I striking a nerve right now? Because not only are you not carrying out the work, you're not executing on what needs to be done, you're hesitating, you're overthinking. There's this perfectionism that's looming. And then there's this constant second guessing. And so the fear of inadequacy is what is beginning to shape your behavior. And then eventually the doubt becomes more limiting than the actual skill gap. So where it could be that maybe you needed to brush up on something, well, now because you're living in this world of doubt, it's more focused on the doubt. And that is what is causing you some issues. And I've seen this play out in real time, and it is not a pretty sight. And it's definitely not comfortable. And so I know that it's not comfortable for the person who is experiencing the doubt, but it's certainly not comfortable for those who can see something is a little bit off, and we're trying to understand it. And so here's an example, because I've dealt with this personally with myself and with some of my colleagues and direct reports. One of my former direct reports, this person was really quite talented, but they could not and would not make decisions. And they needed constant assurance and direction. All of which I didn't have time. I didn't really have the capacity to do a lot of hand holding. And it did not matter how much encouragement and coaching was provided to this person. He believed that he was incapable, and then he really was. And so therefore he could not progress, which was really a sad state of affairs because they brought a lot of skill and talent to the position that we needed. And so this made for some really uncomfortable experiences for him and everybody else. And quite frankly, he lived a self fulfilling prophecy. He believed that he could not do it, which led to negative interactions with me and with other people on the team. And that's really what happens when you buy the lie. And it doesn't have to be that way, okay? Because not every uncomfortable experience is imposter syndrome. Sometimes people truly are underprepared and need development. Sometimes they need mentorship. And, when we are really honest, sometimes they just need the experience. They didn't have the experience that was necessary, but maybe they were able to talk their way through the interview and really market themselves. And so this is what this comes down to, okay? What you lack is trust in your own competency. When you recognize that you have the skill, you have the experience, but you don't have the trust, okay? And so this is what I want you to be aware of, because there's a danger here. Self-doubt is a very poor evaluator of ability. And once you view your ability through self-doubt, then your emotions are triggered, which can then make it seem even more challenging. Because what's going to happen is it's going to be very difficult to unhitch the limiting belief from your capabilities and then subsequently your performance. They're all going to be linked. And then you're going to be on this continuing loop going in and out of these situations. So there are some highly qualified people constantly questioning themselves. But then you got a lot of unqualified people who never do. Look at the two of those things. There's a heightened sense of awareness, maybe a hyper sense of awareness for some. And then for others, they don't have enough awareness to recognize that maybe they need to ask a question or two to really understand if they're prepared to do the job. So if your internal uncertainty is the only thing measuring your readiness, your perception may be deeply inaccurate and flawed. Okay. Leadership especially requires functioning without complete certainty. And I want you to understand this. Leadership is going to be very uncomfortable. And there are going to be times where you're not going to have 100% of the information that you need to carry out the job, to give the directions, to give the authority or the authorization to carry something out. But you still have to move forward. There are decisions that you will make without perfect information. Okay. These are actually the moments where you will learn while you're leading. Sometimes you have to build the airplane while you're flying it. And of course, this is not ideal, but oftentimes that is what happens because you don't always have what you need. But as you're going through it, you figure out what it is that you need to do. Okay. The responsibilities that stretch you before you feel fully prepared, those are going to be those golden nuggets that you will remember, and you will be able to think back on those things in future situations and recall what you did. And those are likely going to be the very things that help you to get through some of the other challenges that you're eventually going to face along your leadership journey. Okay. That is not always evidence that you do not belong. Okay. Sometimes that's just the evidence that you're growing. And yes, you're going to consistently and constantly grow if you're a good leader. If you are ever in a position, a leadership position specifically, and you're not growing, or you think that you know everything about the job that there is to know, as a leader, that might not be the place where you will ultimately stay. Okay. The issue becomes when you doubt and what it causes you to do. So doubt is going to cause you to shrink instead of contribute. So you hear something going on in a meeting and you know that, oh, wait, maybe we need to consider A, B, and C, or what about this situation that we encountered so many months ago, whatever the case may be. The fact that you're not speaking up because you doubt yourself means that you might be putting your department, your team, your organization in a precarious situation. Whereas if you had just mentioned what you had on your mind, it might have been enough to push pause, right? Stop the line. And another thing that doubt causes you to do is to stay silent instead of leading, excuse me. And then sometimes you over prepare instead of executing. You're so busy trying to gather information, waiting for all of what you think is relevant, that you miss out on the opportunity. That does not go well for you. Okay. And this is another thing that stands out, because when you doubt yourself, then you're seeking permission to move forward. You're seeking permission to carry out something instead of trusting your judgment. You're looking for affirmation from other people. A leader does not have to wait on others to trust their own judgment. So I want you to understand that, because this is important. And at that point, the self doubt itself is becoming the obstacle, because now it's getting in your way. You can't do the best, you can't perform optimally because you're in your own head. And that's a problem. We want to get rid of that. And this is what I want you to consider, because eliminating self doubt, it's really not going to be a one-time thing that you complete overnight. It doesn't happen like that. Because realistically, as you continue to progress, you're going to encounter situations that might cause you to pause and question. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, because again, are you assessing, or are you doubting yourself and placing obstacles and hindrances upon yourself? Okay, this is some of what I mentioned earlier. You can stop allowing it to make your decisions. You can stop allowing self doubt to drive what you do and how you move. You can start evaluating yourself based on evidence instead of emotion. You can ask yourself a question like, am I responding to this situation based on my feelings? And if so, what feelings? A little self talk is going to go a long way in talking yourself out of believing the wrong things. I just want you to be aware that you have to recognize within yourself, when you're looking at objective evidence that has clearly demonstrated that you are capable and competent and talented and skilled to do this work, as opposed to just feeling that you can't. There's a big difference. Okay. Another thing that you can do is you can just recognize the difference between excuse me, and incompetence. Sometimes it is uncomfortable to to carry out something or to make a decision about something, because again, you might not have 100% of the information that you thought is relevant enough to help you to do that, to make that decision. It does not mean that you're incompetent. What that means is that you have to rely upon your previous experience and apply that and help you get through that. Okay. Another thing that you can do is just contribute to whatever the situation is before you feel perfectly confident. In fact, you should be in the habit of doing that. Even if you think that it might be a little off base, you can always preface your contribution by saying, okay, well, I know that this might not necessarily be directly related, but this is what this made me think. And just go from there, because you will help to spark additional conversation and the generation of ideas, whatever the case may be. Contribute in that way, and recognize that it does not have to be perfect in order for you to contribute something. Okay. And then another thing is, I want you to stop interpreting every challenge as proof that you're failing. If we all lived in that world where everything that we encountered as a challenge, it means that we're failures, okay, well then all of us should probably be in therapy at this point. And I don't say that even to make light of therapy and therapists, because I think that it's necessary. My point is, why would I limit myself to the failure status every time I encountered a problem? Yeah, because it's rough going through some problems. I think we all recognize that, but it does not mean that you're a failure. And then another thing that you can do is just allow yourself to develop publicly. Everybody around you recognizes that None of us has 100% of the answers and that they're not always going to be right. It doesn't matter. And let me just tell you, people are not looking at you and thinking about you the way that you might think. They have their own issues and challenges that they have to work through. They're not concerned about what you think, what you look like, how you're carrying out things. It's just not that important to other people. It's very important to you. It's very important to me, for myself, but other people are just not that concerned. Everybody is trying to do the best that they can. You do what you can do, they do what they can do. And you can also just be honest about where your growth really is, okay, or where it needs to be. And let's not turn every weakness into an identity crisis. We all recognize that there are areas of improvement about ourselves that need some attention. But that does not mean that you have to break yourself down and rebuild yourself back up. No, it just means that there are some areas where you need to focus some attention, and you should be able to pinpoint that because no one knows you better than you. And what that's actually going to mean is get a trusted colleague and share information back and forth so that you can get some feedback to help you. These things I think are going to be very helpful in the long run to assist you as you go on in your leadership journey. Okay. And please be aware, I do not want you to confuse newness of exposure to incompetence because they are not the same. And as an example, I've started new jobs just like you've started new jobs. And oftentimes that's when that imposter syndrome is at its worst, is when we're in these new positions. And as you can probably relate, I simply lacked the experience with one of the jobs that I had taken with their systems and their processes. So I just was not fully aware. And so I can remember being given some light directions on a process that we were working on. And because I didn't know the systems, I approached it with this mindset, okay, what would I do if I was in one of my old positions? How would I have handled that? And yes, while I went through the steps and the steps should have worked, the problem was not me. The problem was not my skill set nor my experience. The issue was the inconsistent record keeping and the systems that the organization was maintaining. And it made me question my competency. But you know what I did? I quickly realized that that was out of my control. And there was nothing that I was going to be able to do to avoid that. And once I provided the information and just kind of shared what my experience was, okay, well, everything was fine because they recognized, look, we're not reporting this information consistently. They recognized that there was a problem. They mean that the upper leadership. And so what's the moral of the story? Development is normal. Learning is normal, and needing refinement is normal. All of these things are normal, but constantly disqualifying yourself, that's not normal. And I don't want you to continue to walk in that path. Because if you're disqualifying yourself because you don't believe that you belong, you don't believe that you have the capability, well, that is fear. And you are not to operate out of fear because who gains from that? It's certainly not you, nor is it anyone else who's going to benefit from what you can contribute. All right. So if anyone tells you that leadership is the absence of doubt, okay, you can just discount what they said and don't listen to that advice because that's bad advice. Part of leadership is the ability to move responsibly in the face of doubt, even if it's your own doubt. All right. And believe me when I say that you are in good company when I tell you that many leaders struggle with doubt, but it is often unfounded. There's no evidence that you should doubt yourself. Whole organizations and teams and families, they suffer because capable people just like you keep shrinking themselves. So listen to these questions. What would your leadership look like if you stopped treating self-doubt as the voice of truth? And then what about this? What opportunity would you finally pursue once you recognize that the self-doubt is not real? Your next level may not require more competency. It may actually require more trust in the competency that you already possess. So I want you to walk in that. And then additionally, just continue leading by joining me for the She Leads Her Money online workshop. The link is in the show notes. And while you're there, be sure to hit follow so that you don't miss an episode and share it with a friend, because as you grow, I grow. We want the audience to grow. We want others to benefit from this leadership journey that we're all on. Okay. I appreciate that you are here and that you've listened. So until next time, be thoughtful, be wise, be strategic, and remember, crossroads reveal who you are, catalysts shape who you become. Every decision matters, so make it count. I'll talk to you next week.